Hi everyone. So today we're going to introduce the idea of conference presentations in a pretty short video lecture. We're going to go over how you might submit to them, how you might structure them, and what kinds of oral and presentation skills you want to keep in mind as you begin this final project. I want to give a disclaimer before we start that conference presentations are usually concerned with results and data. You don't have that for this presentation because you are going to be simply translating your RFP into a oral and visual format, into a conference presentation format. I'll be sure throughout this presentation to identify where I'm talking about things you should do outside of class in your field versus things you should do for this particular assignment. So first, an overview. Conference presentations are another way to share information and to situate yourself within a disciplinary community. They're usually hosted by academic institutions, whether journals, professional associations, or universities themselves. The gatherings of researchers in the field vary in size, scope, audience, and focus or research interest. You may apply to a conference that is national, international, regional, huge on the level of thousands of attendees, as small as 20 people, specific to your incredibly focused research area, or broad across the discipline. They serve as a means for receiving immediate feedback on research, results, and works in progress, and therefore often function as a kind of peer review step before going off and submitting to journals or edited collections. They're a way for you to engage in personal, in-person relationships with researchers in your field. In fact, for many, conferences are exclusively a networking opportunity to get yourself and your research in front of important people in the field. While I'm not asking you to write a proposal for a conference presentation, this is actually typically how you would apply, is by writing an abstract proposal. There's often a call for proposals, papers, or presentations that goes out, and this indicates a specific theme for this year's conference and rules that you need to follow as you're writing your proposal. Some conferences have special areas that you submit to for specific focuses in your field. Some are wide open, some are very specific. It really just varies from conference to conference. So this is why it's very important to actually read a CFP, a call for proposals, before submitting to a conference. You want to make sure that your presentation or idea is actually going to fit with what they're looking for. Typically, the abstract that you propose will involve a purpose statement, a method statement, a results statement, and an implication statement. So it's actually very similar to the abstract you may have written for your literature review, your RFP, or elsewhere for a journal article. You want to make sure you look for submission constraints or elements in the CFP as well, because these are going to tell you exactly how to structure your proposal, things to think about as you're writing, how to speak directly to the CFP call. But in any case, they're going to tell you, they might tell you actually a specific structure for writing, which is always very helpful. They're definitely going to tell you a word count for your abstract. They might indicate that you're only going to have a specific time constraint for your presentation, which helps you structure how much you're going to pack into that abstract. They should tell you a submission date, any categories or keywords you need to include, and then often there's actually information about how to apply for travel grants, whether separately or through some kind of statement in your proposal itself. And this is especially important for students like yourselves, whether undergraduate or graduate. Money is hard to come by, and so being able to apply for extra travel funds is often useful. So once you get your paper accepted, you've submitted your abstract, you get that great email saying, "Congratulations, we're happy to have you." You want to start thinking about the structure of your talk, which is where you're kind of situated right now with your project, this final conference presentation project. So generally these are 10 to 15 minute presentations. Sometimes they go as long as 20 minutes, but they usually follow a truncated IMRAD structure. And what IMRAD stands for is Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. And we kind of talked about this in the RFP assignment, though not explicitly calling it IMRAD. There's more emphasis on the results and discussion part of that than on the introduction. which is essentially your literature review, and then your methods. In a conference presentation, you really want to focus on that data as opposed to the methods or the literature that it comes from. Though, of course, if your presentation involves a serious argument about methodological stances, that might look a little bit different. Your introduction and conclusion are arguably the most important sections of your talk, even though they might be shorter. And this is because your audience is most likely to pay attention during these moments. The middle of your talk, where you talk about your data and your methods and all of that, people tend to wander. They don't tend to pay as much attention. So your justification and implications, your introduction and your conclusion, those are going to be really important to make a lasting impression on your audience. So in your introduction, you want to open by, of course, introducing yourself, but also your topic and where your research is situated. This entails a brief overview of the literature and the gap in the literature that this project fills. In your RFP, this is going to be a truncated version of your introduction and background sections. You'll also want to provide a goal and an overview of your talk so that your audience knows why they're there and what they're going to hear. This might be as simple as at the beginning of the talk, orally going over what you're going to talk about, like I do in these video lectures, or it might be a specific slide where you run through what the sections are going to be. You might put this before you begin, or it might be after you introduce the literature and the gap that you're filling with this project and the scope and topic of the talk. It just kind of depends where that conversation is most comfortable for you to have. Let's see. While this is a shorter version of your RFP's intro and background sections, again, it's still very important. So you want to be able to clearly articulate that gap and the research questions you're addressing or the research topic you're addressing. Next, you want to briefly go over your methods and research design. But unlike the RFP, which involved a bit more justification for your choices in this regard, this should be actually a minimal part of your presentation. The majority of your presentation needs to be focused on your results and discussion, as this is the point of why people are here to hear what you say and why you're there to present. Most presenters will tend to identify the significance of individual findings as they go, but recognize that you'll need to come back to that significance in your conclusion. Now, you won't have results and findings in your projects. So for the most part, you'll want to focus this project on the introduction and conclusion, which of course indicates impact and significance of the proposed study. Again, this is the last thing, the first and last thing people will hear from you in your presentation. So these pieces of information are perhaps the most important piece of your presentation. Again, even though they're the shortest pieces of your information, to begin and end on what makes the research important is going to be really, really important for you. Finally, I want to go through some things to keep in mind in terms of delivery. First of all, you want to decide beforehand whether you're dead set on memorizing your paper or script, reading directly from the page, or speaking ad hoc from notes you've written down. Whatever is most comfortable and effective for you is what you should go with. None of these methods are necessarily better than the other. The biggest thing to keep in mind is what you're going to read from if you're going to use notes at all. In the moment, you can fumble and get nervous and very easily lose your place. So making sure you have visible notes in large font with double or triple spacing between lines is going to be really important for you. In terms of speaking, you want to make sure you speak much slower than you normally would, enunciate, and project. This doesn't necessarily mean yelling, but you want your voice to reach the back wall. So practice this distance beforehand so you can get used to what it feels like to speak at that volume. You also want to make sure you are varying your pitch. Monotone talks are notoriously difficult to sit through, so making your voice somewhat musical by varying your pitch and speaking in natural tones is going to help with that. It also helps people be able to receive complex information a little bit easier if you're varying your pitch. In terms of your body, You obviously want to dress professionally, which means slacks, button-up shirt, blazer or jacket or skirt. And while it's important to dress nicely, it's also important to be comfortable in what you wear, because this will affect how you present. Make sure you're aware of how you're holding your body as well, what position you're standing in, whether you're giving a standoffish or unconfident air with the way you're holding your arms, or whether you're projecting executive presence. Make sure you're keeping eye contact with as much of your audience as possible, even when you're reading from a page. As I'll discuss in the next lecture, you want to make sure you're not blocking anyone's view from your slides or visual as well, that you're not fidgeting with it, that your bodily presence isn't affecting how people see the visual of your presentation. Be purposeful with your gestures as well. If you fidget a lot, find a way to hold yourself so that you're able to minimize that while still projecting a professional stance. Move your hands in specific ways to indicate movement through an idea or openness to the audience. Let no part of your body just kind of wander. Always be aware of what it's doing. The best way to do this is to practice these gestures prior. Figure out what feels natural and what doesn't. Look at yourself in the mirror while you're doing this. What allows you to be aware of yourself and what doesn't? And finally, I want to talk a little bit about breath, because your breath is more important than you know in delivery. More often than not, this is the thing that gets you to fumble, not necessarily being nervous or skipping over words in your script. There's a fine balance between talking and breathing. And when we're in a situation like a presentation, we can actually forget to breathe. So when you practice your presentation, practice a few times, figuring out where you can catch your breath, how you can pace yourself so that you're not running out of breath as you talk. I used to actually put into my scripts, breathe here in really big letters so that I remembered, here's where I needed to just pause for a second and breathe, because that was going to be more important for my presentation than running through my lines. Do some breathing exercises. My favorite is what's called the Ujjayi breath in yoga, actually translated to victorious breath, which I like. The Ujjayi breath does is that it connects your breathing pattern to how you feel in your body. So really, breath is going to be central to making sure that you are confident and relaxed in front of others, and that is visible to others. Okay, that's it for today. We're going to tackle visual design in the next presentation, and I will see you then.